Friends, welcome to another episode of Making Disciples. And today's episode, if you're listening to this as it drops, will be dropping about 4 days earlier than it would usually drop. Normally we drop a podcast on a Monday morning. This has been dropped on Thursday, the 10th of October, because today is Mental Health Awareness Day. And today's interview is with Patrick Regan, who just is a beautiful communicator around mental health and keeping well and supporting each other with the complexities of life. And I wanted to drop this a little bit earlier than usual because we wanted to honour today being Mental Health Awareness Day. So if you're listening to this after next Monday, you won't even notice any difference. But it's out early because we want to say something about discipleship and our emotional and mental health. So friends, welcome to another episode of Making Disciples. I hope you enjoy this interview with Patrick. He is a phenomenal guy. Do check out his work and his ministry and any of the books he has written. If this is your first time here, please subscribe to Making Disciples. This is the straight talking discipleship podcast where we don't use religious jargon. In fact, we're trying to break it down and explain it and take the complexities of the Christian faith and make them really easy to understand. So please do subscribe. Do leave us a comment, share the podcast. Please do communicate to all your friends that this exists. Discipleship podcasts are hard to get out there. It's word of mouth how they get shared. So please do give this a share. Anyway, let's get on with today's topic. An interview on emotional and mental health being dropped on Mental Health Awareness Day with the fabulous Patrick Regan. Patrick Regan, welcome to Making Disciples. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Now, you've set up this new charity, and I need to keep checking how I say it because it's not an English word. And as a Yorkshireman, it doesn't flow out as naturally as it should for many. But Kintsugi Hope. I said that right? Kintsugi Hope?
You have, yeah, that was it, Kintsugi Hope.
Now, I'll ask you later on about where that name comes from because it's such a beautiful... The background behind that name is beautiful in itself. So we'll get to that. But you wrote a book a couple of years ago and it was called Honesty Over Silence. It's okay to not be okay. I love that line. It's not okay to be okay. Is that really true? Because the church don't seem to act like that very often, do we?
No, and that's a real shame, isn't it? Because I feel like when you read the Bible, it's full of people that are just real and honest, and 40% of the Psalms are laments, are David crying out to God, I just don't get this. And I think for me as a leader, Chris, I was not okay. And I remember, you'll probably remember this, we had the royal family at the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. I hope you caught those names as they dropped there. And they came to visit us. And, my photo was everywhere. Went around the world, OK Magazine, Hello Magazine. And everyone was saying to me, oh, wow, Patrick, you're doing really well. But I remember looking at that photo and looking at that guy in the photo. And in the photo, I'm lonely, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. And yet I felt ashamed. And I felt ashamed that I couldn't cope with the stuff that I was feeling. And so I didn't tell anyone. And the book Honesty Over Silence came on a journey where I realized that actually God's not stressed out with my honesty, and that he takes us how we are. He loves that. And we're all broken in some ways. And so it's just a desire to be more real, more honest and more authentic. And I guess I've been on that journey for a number of years now.
Remember when I was at university doing my degree, there was a period of time where I just hit this rock bottom and I had to go home for a few weeks just because I needed space. You wouldn't say it was depression, but it was definitely this hit rock bottom. And then about 12 years ago, at my last church, there was a period where it was so tough. There was moments where I just didn't want to get out of bed. Yeah. And I was quite happy just to stay there. And then in the last 10 years where we are in East London, I would say that there's a hold over East London. Depression is a reality for most lives. And people who've never had problems with mental health issues somehow move to East London. And there's something about it that just starts to chip away at you. Mm. And it feels to me like it's one of those things that the church just hasn't talked about, but it's right there every Sunday or every day. It's just right there and it's avoided. Why do you think we don't talk about it? What's the reason behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I've asked that question to people, they're scared of people judging them and they're scared of being put down. They already feel really guilty about themselves, and sometimes, but particularly in church culture, you sort of feel like this victorious Christian living, and we use the words should, must, ought. I should be okay. I ought to have it together. I must have it together. I should, I must, I ought. And I often say that show reel looks okay. The Facebook page may look good, but what's going on inside is really, really difficult. And yet somehow in church, we've created this culture where people are pretending they're okay, where actually they're falling apart. And there's loads of reasons why we created that culture, and it's created over many, many years. But I really feel that most church leaders I speak to, they say the biggest issue they're facing in their community at the moment is mental health. Whether it's within the church or outside the church, but actually sometimes within the church it's harder to talk about because we've got poor theology that goes alongside that. Yeah. So whereas people in the community will talk about mental health, sometimes within the church we just don't do it. It's hard to find a decent sermon on it, and issues, emotional issues like anger. I had a massive issue of anger, and I'd never heard a sermon on it apart from Jesus and the Money Changers, and yeah. The Bible says loads about anger. Anger is an emotional response to pain. It's not bad to be angry. The anger tells you something's wrong. Yeah. And I would say to people, let anger be a visitor but not a resident. That's what Ecclesiastes is about. I like that. And so we've got to create a different culture. We've got to create a culture of transparency and honesty and integrity.
I heard a church leader say not too long ago that depression is a medical issue, not a theological issue, not a Bible God issue. And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I would say right at the start of Genesis, Adam and Eve eat the apple and they put on fig leaves. And right at the very start of the story is humanity puts on fig leaves and pretends everything's fine when it's not. Yeah. And then we bring that into the church and we pretend everything's fine and it's not. So it's not a health issue, it's a discipleship issue in the sense of we've got to take the fig leaves off as disciples to really reveal who we are so that God and the family of God can make a difference, I guess. Yeah.
And there's nothing more beautiful, isn't it, than someone really knowing you and loving you anyway. And obviously that's what Christ does for us, And I think the root cause to a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of perfectionism is shame. And shame and guilt are very different things. Guilt is I've done something wrong. I need to say sorry. Shame is I am wrong. And there's fundamental identity issue, and my friend often describes it. I don't know if you remember whack-a-mole at the pier. Yeah. It's where you whack these things; they pop up all the time, and they get faster and faster, and you just keep whacking them all over the place. And he said sometimes life's like that. Depression pops up and you feel like you've got to whack it with a Bible verse. And then anxiety pops up, you've got to whack it. He said actually what you need to do to stop them popping up is turn the machine off. And what is driving those things coming up is often shame. And, Brené Brown famously says shame loves silence, secrecy and judgment. It has two gremlins in your head that will say, who do you think you are? And you're not enough. They are the two gremlins that often people struggle with. And so combating shame is huge. And the way you combat shame is empathy and understanding towards others, but also towards yourself.
Yeah. And mental health and emotional health is right in the heart of the Bible, isn't it? You got Job. Yeah. You've mentioned David in the Psalms, Elijah, Jeremiah. All there's times when, Moses retreats into the wilderness because he just wants to be on his own. He doesn't want to be around people. So a lot of them are the prophets as well, the creatives. There's a connection between the songwriter and depression, and the creatives and depression, and it's there in the Bible. But we almost skim past it, and we want to talk about this these amazing things these people did, but we don't want to talk about the lowest moments of their lives.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And unless we start doing that, then it's just another reason why the church isn't a place to be, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And, there's a lot talked about in today's culture about resilience. And yet the people of God, I was preaching on Jeremiah 29, verse 11, for I've got plans to prosper you and to give you future and hope and all that stuff, which is about one of the most misquoted verses in the Bible, because it was written to a people that were in exile, a people. It wasn't written to an individual. It was written to a community. And the fact, if you read Jeremiah 28, Hananiah has basically prophesied that you're going to be in exile for 2 years. And Jeremiah comes along and goes, you know what? It's 70 years.
Yeah.
But in that place of feeling orphaned and abandoned, you've got to pray for the prosperity of the city, and you've got to realize there's hope within that. And I think that's what resilience is. Resilience is thriving despite adversity. It's actually realizing that those things that affect us don't affect every area of our lives. They say, a famous psychologist said there's 3 P's to resilience. One is personalization. Not everything is your fault. When things go wrong, I'm an all or nothing type of person. It's always my fault. 2 is not permanent. Hope is saying nothing lasts forever. And is pervasiveness. Just because something goes wrong in one area of your life doesn't mean it's going to affect all of your life. And you sort of look within Jeremiah and the story of Jeremiah, and you see these guys in exile, and God saying, you know what, it's not going to last forever. It's going to be something that you're going to find hope within that. And I think that's my experience.
Yeah. Kind of linking with that then. Last year I heard you speak, and you used a phrase that I just thought was fantastic. And then I was at a conference this Easter, and lots of people were talking about hearing you speak, and you were using this phrase, and it's the word flawsome.
Yes.
What is that about? Because it is really helpful. What is that about?
So flawsome came. I've got a PA who's just started working Kintsugi Hope, and she was French, and she sent me this word on WhatsApp, flawsome. And I thought, that's really sweet. She's made up a really nice word. And I looked it up in the dictionary, and it was there. And flawsome means an individual who embraces their flaws and knows they're awesome regardless. Yeah. Which is amazing. And so what I've done at a lot of the end of our events is I've got this little card here. It says flawsome on it. And you probably have struggled to see that a little bit. But on there is a thumbprint. Yeah. And I get... everyone, because sometimes in church, if you struggle with anxiety, and the leader at the front goes, come forward for prayer if you've got anxiety, it's the most difficult thing in the world. I'm always sitting there having a laugh, but I'm not going forward. So I wanted to do something that everyone could do. And so we gave everyone one of these cards, and everyone's got a unique fingerprint. And so people come and they just put their fingerprint on it, and they take away the card. And this card was from a kid who heard me speak at Easter, actually, with Down syndrome. And he said, I very rarely can concentrate throughout a whole talk, and I rarely come away feeling so special because of all my challenges I have. So this is my card, and I want you to have it and to remind people that they're flawsome, that they're unique. And I think it's very, very special for me.
Yeah. How is that... I just think in the room, those moments where everybody together does something that responds, that has that Me Too moment, are the most powerful, aren't they? Yeah, totally. And I was at an event not too many years ago where somebody said, raise your hand if somebody in your family or you yourself has cancer. And all these hands went up, and suddenly there was this corporate sense of, phew, there are others like me. Yeah, 100%. What's that like, being in the room when people do that? How do people respond to that idea that they're flawsome?
I think it's just a massive relief for people. You literally see people, as you're speaking, poking each other. There's a lot of nervous laughter as you talk about the things that we all do, in dealing with some of the challenges in life. And one of the thing is, we take the flawsome thing one step further, and we have a big cross at the front. And we say, once you've done the card, why don't you come forward and just put your fingerprint on the cross? And by doing that, you're saying, I recognise that I was worth dying for. Yeah. And to see 500 or 600 people do that, it's really moving. We've had people of faith, people of no faith do it. And I think for me, when I was going through my tough time, it was my counsellor said to me, she was a Christian, and she said to me, Patrick, I think you need to understand what self-compassion is. And I was like, I'm not really into that. I'm an activist. I want to go and change the world. Self-compassion's, I'm a bloke. It sounds wussy. And I don't want anyone to have an excuse not to do social justice or action and evangelism. And she was like, you have totally misunderstood what self-compassion is. And she said, self-compassion and self-indulgence are two really different things. Self-compassion is talking to yourself the way that you would talk to your best friend. And, it's a bit like, we've been friends for a number of years, and it's a bit like if you rang me up and said, I'm having a tough time in Bow, this has happened, that's happened. I wouldn't turn around to you and go, oh, come on, Chris, it's a good gig. Cheap a little bit, pull yourself together. I dream of saying that to you, but I say that stuff to myself all the time.
Every day.
And every single day. I am my biggest critic. And so I'm learning to actually go, is that true? To get curious almost about the way I'm thinking. And I think that's really helpful. And you're 100% right. Once you realise you're not on your own, Elijah, when he was like, he said to God, take my life, I've had enough. I'm the only one left. And God was like, actually, there's 7,000 prophets in hiding.
How does this link then with... So Paul says the old has gone, the new has come. You are a new creation. So in Jesus, we're new. Surely the old flawed bit has gone. So don't we just power on as perfect people? What? Yeah,
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around that, because I think there's this whole thing around the now and the not yet. That's what the kingdom of God is all about, isn't it? Is that sense that Christ has come. There is hope. It's a bit like that verse, be perfect because my Father is perfect, be perfect as I am perfect, and all that stuff in Matthew 5. And people really misunderstand that, because like, well, what it's actually saying is we don't understand it in our language. It's like it's growing towards, Romans. He works things together for good. It's a process. He's working things together. They're not all good. Not all bad stuff is good. And so I really think it is about this now and not yet, the process, that sense of being in that place of tension sometimes and working it through. And, in other parts, Paul goes, I don't want you to be ill-informed, brothers. I am shipwrecked. I am beaten. I am near death. He was quite a realist. He didn't mix his words in that sense. So we have to take scripture in the whole.
I preached on that passage a number of years ago, and this guy comes up to me who was a Greek scholar and said, Chris, I just want you to know that when it says new there, it doesn't mean new as in a brand new baby or a brand new car. It means renewed. The best way of translating it would be recycled. And for me, that was incredibly helpful in this idea that in Christ, nothing is lost of us. All of our broken bits are still there, but somehow he binds them together in a way that brings about a renewed thing that is more beautiful than it was before.
And that's exactly the kintsugi image.
So this is a good moment. Tell us about the kintsugi. I've realised you just say it super fast, so it doesn't matter where you put the letters. Kintsugi, where does that come from?
So kintsugi is a Japanese word, and it basically means golden joinery. And so if you break a pot, we're meant it with super glue. And the whole idea is you hide the cracks, right? You try and pretend it's not broken. What they do in Japan is they put gold powder in the glue. So instead of hiding the cracks, they make a feature of the cracks. So arguably the object becomes more beautiful than before. It certainly becomes more unique, because you won't find an object like it on the planet now. And the whole idea is that beauty comes from brokenness, that shame, scars are not something to be ashamed of. Scars are a place of healing. And so we've been starting these Kintsugi Hope Wellbeing groups. My wife wrote a 12-week program similar to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, around well-being. And we've literally seen hundreds of people around the country go through these 12-week groups. Most churches run them as life groups, and they invite non-Christians. About a third of people that attend aren't Christians. But after 12 weeks of doing life with a small group, they want to stay as part of the life group, the home group. So churches have been growing. Other churches have been amazing. They've been doing it with women involved in prostitution. It's been happening in prisons. It's been happening with women who've been struggling with postnatal depression. And so suddenly this movement has just gone everywhere. And I keep saying to people, the key thing about it is we're not there to rescue people. We're not there to, we're there to love people. We're there to be alongside. A bit like Jesus on the Emmaus Road. You know, he could have butted in at any point and gone, the guy you're talking about, by the way, is me. But he let them go on that journey. And I think that going on that journey with people is so important.
Help me out then. So imagine I'm struggling. We talk about winter blues at All Hallows. We talk about depression, anxiety, stress and worry every other winter. So January tends to be our season we talk about it. So we talk about winter blues. Imagine I'm going through a difficult patch right now. And God just feels distant. It feels silent. It feels like I'm wrapped up in the blanket and I have no sense of God's presence. What would you say to me? What could I do that would help myself? Is there a way of thinking? Is there something I could respond to that would be helpful for me?
Yeah, I mean, I often think Elijah's a good example of this. You know, he's in the pits and he says, God, I just take my life bad enough. And the way God responded to him was really interesting because there was no pep talk. There was no, come on, Elijah, I think of the good old days. You know, Carmel was pretty good, wasn't it? Xenopath, Cherith Ravine, pretty good. Did well there, didn't we? You know, put a positive spin on it, Elijah. Things aren't that bad. He said to Elijah, you need some sleep. You need to eat. And then the angels came and cared for him tenderly. And then God spoke to him in a whisper. And I think when you're in that situation, your thoughts are just going crazy, you know, and there's that verse, isn't there, take captive every thought, which again is really unhealthily preached on. And my friend said to me, which really helped me, he said, if you imagine your thoughts as trains, you'll know living in London, the underground comes every 2 minutes. Yeah. And he said, you're never going to stop the train coming. He said, a lot of people take that verse and think you've got to bash the thought as soon as it comes into your head. And he said, you know, whatever you resist persists. You know, it's a famous Carl Jung says that. Yeah. So if I often say to people, you know, I don't want you to think about chocolate. Anyone listening to this now, please
think about
chocolate. You know, just don't think about it. And now some people are listening going, I'm really trying hard not to think about chocolate. It's really hard. Because whatever resists persists. But he said, what you do is you let the train come and you decide whether you're going to get on that train or not. And you let the train go again. And he said sometimes what he does is he labels the train. Here's my I'm going to die of cancer early train. Yeah. I can't get on that today. And he said, you know what? If you do get on it, get off at the next stop. Don't let it take you on a journey that's going to put you into a really negative zone. So I think a lot of it's about hearing the alternative voice. And sometimes it's just, you just need people to just not fix you. You need people to love you and just people to say, you know what? It's going to be okay. Yeah, it's going to be okay. And just to be there alongside you. And so I would say to people, get curious about your thoughts. Doubt, question. I don't know how many preachers you hear say this. Doubt, question, get curious. And think about what you're really thinking about. Don't always believe what you think. Yeah. That's a good bit of advice. Especially.
Well, okay, that's great. And very often our churches are filled with problem solvers. We love solving a good problem. Yeah. And when it comes to the problems of mental health, it's not a leg that is broken that you go to the doctor and you have you put a plaster on it and it's fixed. There isn't a pill that suddenly solves everything. But we want to come and solve problems. What would you recommend to someone whose friend or family member is really going through a difficult time and they don't seem to be able to shake themselves out of that negative zone right now? What would you recommend? I mean, you've said a few things there about what God doesn't do. So, let's not do what God doesn't do. But what would you recommend?
I think there's a number of really sort of practical things you can do. One is try and be with your friend and be active. Whether that's going for a walk together, whether that's doing some sort of physical exercise, it's getting out of the house. Be active. I've already said about encouraging people to get curious about what they're thinking about. Really think about what you're thinking about. There's practical stuff. For me, I actually started looking at what my diet and what I was eating, which was a big one for me, actually, because I realised I started comfort eating around that whole time. So I think you be active, you get curious, you think about what you're eating. But I think it is this sense of helping them feel like there is no shame in struggling. Is that acceptance? Because I actually think a problem can never get solved if it stays hidden. And so it's getting to a place, medication for some works. I think medication is a little bit like it helps you get to a place where you're strong enough to deal with the root issues.
Yeah.
So sometimes, the temptation is take a pill and I'm done.
Yeah.
Actually, it's part of a holistic package, really, or providing support. So I definitely say there's no shame in taking medication. And sometimes, I've often said to people as well, people that suffer from anxiety and depression, they're often really strong people. There's a book called The Curse of the Strong about clinical depression, and they say the personal characteristics of someone who's depressed are moral diligence, sensitivity, strength. They're often just people that have been strong for too long.
Yeah, holding it together for too long.
Yeah. And anxiety are often people that just care too much. That's how I define it in the book, because they're sensitive. If you've got anxiety and you get up every day and you go to work or you preach in church or you serve in your community or whatever you do, it takes so much energy. You're an incredibly strong person, and you're probably one of those really people that are brilliant at empathy. You can work out where people are at. And, I often say, anxiety is like a car alarm. If it's going off all the time, it's annoying for you and for everyone else. But actually, you're a caring and loving person. And when people say that, they suddenly feel different about themselves. Yeah. And then one last thing I'd say on the friend is my wife, Diane, she wrote a chapter in one of my books called Secondhand Smoke. And the whole idea, you'll know this as a leader, Chris, secondhand smoke can still kill you. Yeah. And, for me, I was the one going through all the challenges. And I was getting a lot of support, really. My wife was getting none. And so we've been looking at how do we look after ourselves? How do you look after yourself? What are the things that we can do to fill our tank? So, it's that classic thing, on a plane, put your own oxygen mask on first. Yeah. It feels wrong in some ways, but it's absolutely crucial if you're going to go and help your child. You cannot help your child without putting your own oxygen mask on first. And so I think learning those sort of things is really helpful.
We had a horrendous accident last year with a member of our church ended up dying as a part of a minibus accident, and everybody else in the minibus was fine apart from her. And sitting with everybody on the minibus and hearing what happened quite graphically ended up leaving me, I couldn't sleep. I was having nightmares. I was replaying their story. I wasn't even there, and I was replaying it. And I found myself just going downhill and getting to the point where I just felt sick inside. I just felt lost. And it was all secondhand smoke. It was somebody else's trauma that became my trauma that led me down a path. And I went and saw a guy, and actually it was the most profound hour of my life. And I came back, and my wife just looked at me and she said, something has been lifted from you. And just spending an hour with somebody where I could talk it through was incredible. Having others that you can just share honestly how you're doing can be one of the biggest. It's not the secret thing. No, it's one of the pieces of the jigsaw, isn't it? Yeah. And the other thing I think is when we're supporting people who have long-term depression, it's a long-term relationship.
Yeah, 100%.
You are committing not for a month or two. You are committing to them for a long period of time, and that is exhausting. And actually, unless you're caring for yourself, you can't care for them.
No,
and it is a commitment that we make. And we often see people who get very excited about caring for somebody who has mental health issues, and then after 2 months, the buzz of the being the saviour is worn off, and then they turn away from the person. They're just too much hard work.
And that's the key. What you just said there, actually, is we're not the saviour.
Yeah.
And like I say, classic thing in counselling is you are not there to rescue that person. And you're right. People start to heal when they feel listened to.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because we do a lot of talking in church.
Yeah.
And actually, how do we create a culture where people feel really listened to? I think there's a famous quote, people will forget what you say, they'll forget what you do, but they'll never forget how that you make them feel. And someone feels really valued when someone feels really listened to. So I think that's absolutely crucial. And you're right, it's a roller coaster, And the thing about mental health, sometimes you can go through seasons where you're feeling a lot better, and then suddenly there can be a trigger point. And again, one of the things that I've started to work out is I've worked out what my trigger points are. So I may dip, but I won't dip as far as I used to, which is a helpful thing to do.
Tell us what you're working on at the moment, KasugiHope.com. What are you working on right now that's particularly exciting you that you'd love people to know about?
I'm loving working with churches. My heart has always been for the local church, and seeing these wellbeing groups start all over the country has been so exciting. And like I said before, my wife wrote this 12-week course, and my home group, we'd been meeting for years. There were 6 of us, and I said to them, "Why don't we do this?" And they were all a little bit cautious. And I said, "But let's not just do it for us. Let's go and invite people in our community." And I gave up my previous job, had no money, and this time I've got a mortgage and 4 children, so it's a little bit more scary. And I think, I don't know if it's going to work. And so we started this little group, and we went into people, just mums in the school playground, went, "We're starting a Kintsugi Hope Wellbeing group." And they did exactly what most people do, went, "Kint what?" And then you describe it, and they're like, "Oh, the gold thing."
Yeah.
"Oh, the gold thing." But then, Chris, what really got to me was they go, "Oh, no, I get it. I'm broken. My husband's just left. I'm broken. I suffer from anxiety. I'm broken. This has happened and that's happened." And so our life group trebled in size. And I'm sitting there the first week, and the first week's on honesty. And Diane just says, turn to the person next to you and talk about a high point in your life and a low point in your life. And so I sat next to this guy who I've been in church with my whole life. And I learned more in 5 minutes than I'd learned in 45 years of being in church. And I actually said to him, "Mate, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that we've created a culture where I didn't know you went through hell and back." And so what we're doing now, we spent a year piloting it. We piloted it in homeless hostels, in coffee shops, in different contexts, is now any church across the UK can apply to Kintsugi Hope to run a wellbeing group in their community. And Chris, my heart for it is I don't just want it to be a tick box thing. We do pastors, we do food bank, we do CAP, these amazing things. Yeah. I really want emotional mental health to be at the heart of what a church is about. And that's why I've been saying, do it in your existing small groups. Don't have to create something else that you have to do. But this is part of who we are as a church. Yeah. We're in every community across this country. We're going to outlast every politician, particularly at the moment. It's not hard, but we're going to outlast every politician. And we have something. We have hope. There is nothing better than your mental health and getting to know Jesus, because he is the model of good health.
Yeah. Because very often churches do church weekends away, and they're looking for things just to inspire them that might then go on to something else. Is there something you could bring to a church weekend away on this that might inspire them to go from that place?
I mean, we're producing a lot of resources around the whole honesty over silence thing, and I think that we've been to quite a few churches speaking and doing stuff like that, and it has created a very interesting conversation. And I was down in Exeter recently, and we did this whole thing in the church over the weekend, and they have now 25 different people wanting to run groups, which is incredible in every sphere of society as well, in the deaf school and for mums and for men, they call men up groups and all that sort of stuff. So I just believe we've got to start the conversation, and I think community. And, we've said it before, loneliness is the biggest killer of our society. It really is. And in some ways, we're the most connected with our phones, and yet people are isolated. GPs are saying to us they're seeing between 1 and 5 lonely people a day. And we have a minister for loneliness. We have a minister for suicide prevention. Suicide is the biggest killer. Completed suicide is the biggest killer of young men. We've got to have this conversation. The church have got to get involved, and I think it'll be good. It'll be good for us.
That's great. How would somebody connect with you? What's the best way to connect?
Online, just our website's got loads of info on it, and we're very relational. So the best thing is to touch base, drop us an email, come and have a coffee, that type of thing. We're working with so many different churches now, and and what I love about the whole Kintsugi thing, and I think we've got to keep this, is one size never fits all. What you guys are pioneering in Bow will be different to if you ran something in your community, it'd be different to mine. And so Diane wrote the whole course in learning styles, and I think this is something I've seen work really well in the sense of we all learn differently, and we use pray as a learning style, which is really clever. So we pray at the start. We have journals where people literally journal through, write psalms, write poems, draw every week. And so I think that we need to do that. We need to create ways where people can really contextualize to where they're at.
Patrick, thank you so much. I think that is really, really helpful. And you talked about doubt earlier on. We've got a podcast coming out about the same time as this one around doubt. And we want to, on this podcast, we want to talk about the things that others aren't really talking about or daren't talk about. But we want to do it in a way that's not religious. It's just with a relationship with Jesus as a part of that. So, Patrick, thank you so much. And it'd be great to pick this up again at some point with you, a bit further down the line when you've got some more thinking as well that we might be able to access and learn from. So, Patrick, thank you so much, and we'll speak to you soon.
God bless. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.